Chapter 24. Nick felt himself being shaken roughly. He hoped it was a dream because it wasn't ready to wake up. "Move it," a hushed voice commanded. Nick opened one eye and saw Dwayne Screw Jr. standing over him, dressed in a hunting camo. "Twilly just called," he said. "We gotta go." "Where?" "There." "But what about school?" Nick said. Smoke grabbed his ankles and hauled him out of the sheets. "Go write a note to your babysitter." "She's not my babysitter." "Whatever. Put a note in the kitchen. Tell her you caught a ride to Truman with one of the seniors." "But it's still nighttime," Nick said. "No, dude, that's the fog." Nick dressed in his regular school outfit, including a necktie and blazer, in case Peyton woke up and saw him leaving. He didn't know that she was in a deep, bear-like sleep because she had been up till 3 a.m. texting back and forth with her girlfriends that were on a trip in Hong Kong. Together, Nick and Smoke slipped out the front door. "Are we taking the motorcycle?" Nick asked, wondering if he had dressed warmly enough for the open ride. Twilly said no, the muffler's too noisy. Smoke said, "Today we need to be quiet." At the end of the block, they came upon a blue Prius, parked with its headlights on. Although the windshield was glossy with dew, Nick could make out two upright shapes in the car. He assumed it was Twilly and Mrs. Starch. He was half right. The driver's window rolled down and Twilly told Nick and Smoke to get in the back seat. Once he was buckled, Twilly pointed at his four-legged passenger. "Say hello to Horace." With droopy eyelids, the bloodhound turned towards the boys, a string of pearly drool unspooling from his lower lip. Smoke cowered delightfully. "Is that the same one that was chasing us?" "All is forgiven," Twilly said from behind his black sunglasses. Nick stroked the dog's silky ears. "Don't tell me he fell for the old raw hamburger trick." "Nah, it was steak," Twilly said. "One sniff and Horace decided I was his new best friend. He turns out he's pretty good company. He doesn't ask a lot of nosy questions." "How do you know his name is Horace?" "Because that's what his boss man was hollering all over the woods after he lost him." "By the way," Twilly said, eyeing him in the rearview mirror, "why are you dressed like an usher? Or is that what you normally wear for a hike through the swamp?" No, I had to look like I was on my way to school," Nick said, reddening, and he shed his Truman blazer and yanked off his tie. "So why are you wearing the shades?" he said sharply. "It's practically dark out." "Not to me," Smoke said. Smoke said, "Did you find some more of you-know-what?" "Yep," Twilly said. "How fresh?" 2 hours, tops." Nick said forward excitedly. "Panther scat?" "Right," said Twilly. Smoke looked out the window of the car. "Awesome," he murmured. Nick borrowed Smoke's cell phone to call Marta, who begged to come along. At first, Twilly balked, but Smoke spoke up and said he couldn't hurt to have an extra set of eyes and ears on the hunt. Nick instructed Marta to meet them at the mailbox near the bus stop, and she was waiting in jeans and a hooded sweatshirt when the car pulled up. She was so excited that she practically hurled herself into the back seat. It took a few moments before she noticed the large, sobbing dog in the front. "What's the deal with him?" she said. "Oh, that's just Horace," said Nick. "He's a bloodhound," Smoke added. "A good one." Horace yawned at the compliment. Marta said, "Oh, I get it. He's going to help us track the mama panther." Twilly made a noise like a game show buzzer. "Wrong," he said. "Horace will soon be tied under a tree, snoring like a train. He does not do cats." "He's a trained manhunter," Smoke explained. "Where'd he come from?" Marta asked. Nick said, "Twilly dog-napped him." "Not true. I bribed him with a T-bone, that's all," said Twilly. "He drove slower than normal because it was super foggy, and it took a while to reach the dirt road leading to the Black Vine Swamp." Along the way, he pulled over briefly to snug the seatbelt around Horace, which Nick thought was a good idea. A bouncy ride could cause an unpleasant problem for a big dog with a full stomach. Also for the other passengers. They concealed Mrs. Starch's car in the same place as before beneath the same strangler fig and set out on foot. Twilly led Horace on rope leash and Smoke followed next. Nick and Marta stayed closely so that they wouldn't get left behind in the fog, which hung like a wet woolen shroud over the marsh and tree islands. A small fire was burning at Twilly's camp. Smoke joined Marta and Nick as they stood beside it, and the heat feeling glorious on their cheeks. Twilly tied the hound to a cabbage palm and set out a bowl of water, which he loudly slurped. Afterwards, Twilly made a pot of coffee and everybody had a cup. Twilly told them to drink up quickly. Nick wasn't crazy about the taste, but he was grateful for a warm rush. Mrs. Starch came out of her tent holding the straw hat. The baby panther popped its head out and cried plaintively. "Patience, dear Squirt," Mrs. Starch said to the kitten. The 3 kids gathered around to look. And adorable as it was, the cat was restless and squirmy and not very huggable. Nick noticed long, nasty scratch marks on Mrs. Starch's arms. Meanwhile, Horace, the bloodhound, had already dozed off under the tree. Twilly stood away from the fire, pressing buttons on his handheld GPS. He said, "The good news is they won't be using helicopters to hunt for us, not in this weather. The bad news is it's going to be twice as hard for us to find this little guy's mom." Mrs. Starch fixed an iron gaze on Nick and Marta. "Silence on the trail is absolutely essential," she told them. One tiny human sneeze could scare the mama cat away for good. That would be the death sentence for Squirt. Do you understand? He can't live on zoo milk forever. Marta and Nick nodded soberly. Both were thinking the other panther cub, the one that had died. "Time to go," said Smoke. Twilly ducked into the tent and emerged with a rifle. "What's that for?" Marta asked nervously. "Peace of mind." Twilly checked the ammo belt to make sure the bullet sleeve was full. "Everybody ready?" The miniature panther growled impatiently inside the straw hat, and even Twilly laughed. They filed out of the clearing and into the misted woods. Twilly led the way, followed by Dwayne Screw Jr., Nick, Marta, and lastly Mrs. Starch, pressing a bottle of formula to the hungry cub's mouth. For almost half an hour, they hiked briskly yet quietly through the cypress woods, flatlands, hammocks, and then more pines and palmetto scrub. The fog only seemed to get thicker, wetter, and colder. Twilly was using the GPS unit to retrace the earlier steps. Without it, Nick knew they'd never find what they were looking for. Not a word was spoken, even by Marta when she briefly lost a sneaker in the muck. Likewise, Mrs. Starch didn't utter the faintest cry when the panther kitten miffed because the milk had run out, swatted her nose with an oversized paw, drawing blood. At last, Twilly motioned for the search party to halt and gather around him. He bent down and carefully lifted a palmetto frond, revealing it to the ground, a dark greenish pile of unmistaken origin, containing tufts of deer hair, bits of bone, and wisps of white egret feathers. Marta pointed to the poop lump, the smelly lump, and silently mouthed the words, "Panther poop." Twilly made a thumbs up again. Dwayne Screw Jr. dropped to one knee and began examining the scat. The only extraordinary sound in the swamp was the one of the baby panther rumbling inside Mrs. Starch's straw hat. Nick felt Marta gently take a hold of his shirt tail. After a few moments, Smoke rose again and began to move stealthily in small, weightless steps along a tangled trail that he could alone detect. The others followed, their hearts hammered with anticipation. Jimmy Lee Bayless thought it would be best if he spoke to the game warden alone, but Drake McBride insisted on coming along. Jimmy Lee Bayless had already told Melton and the rest of the crew to take the morning off in order to avert any risk of the federal officers overhearing Red Diamond machinery at 22. The jostled drive to the Blackvine Swamp was murder on Drake McBride's fractured ribs, and he groaned and cussed the whole time. Jimmy Lee Bayless stopped the company truck near the entrance to the public boardwalk. He had never seen fog so thick. It was like a cold, clinging smoke. Drake McBride got out, rubbing his bandaged midsection. He was still mad about the $5,000 he had given to the owner of the missing bloodhound. "You think a panther really snacked on that dog? No way, partner." "Doesn't matter," Jimmy Lee Bayless said. "We had no choice but to pay the man off." Drake McBride snorted scornfully. "He's nothing but a scammer." "Whatever. He found the well pit in 22. And he would have ratted us out if we didn't give him the money." "Man, I hate scammers," Drake McBride said. Jimmy Lee Bayless laughed. He couldn't help it. He completely understood why Drake McBride's father thought his son was a boob. The green pickup rolled out of the haze and stopped. The side of the truck on the logo was U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Drake McBride said, "Let me deal with this punk, Jimmy Lee." The punk turned out to be a good bit older than Drake McBride, though much more physically fit. He wore a badge and carried a gun on his hip and introduced himself as the Special Agent Conaway. "Special Agent?" Drake McBride smirked. "So you're like James Bond for the Moody's?" "And who would you be?" Conaway said. "Drake McBride, I'm the president of Red Diamond Energy." "Right," Conaway looked at Jimmy Lee Bayless. "And you?" "He's my project manager," Drake McBride said. "Mr. Bayless is his name. Let me save you all from wasting your time one more second on this prescient time. There's no panthers out here, okay? Nada. Somebody made a big mistake." Conaway smiled politely. "We received a report from a citizen who's quite concerned quite certain he saw one in this area, so we're required to check it out. Not today, gentlemen, not in this heavy fog. Jimmy Lee Bayless quietly exhaled in relief, and Drake McBride shimmered. Where does the boundary on your oil lease start? Conaway asked. 3/4 mile down the road, Jimmy Lee Bayless said, pointing. There's a sign and a metal gate. Leave it unlocked tomorrow morning. The Fish and Wildlife agent advised. If there's no weather, I'll be back with a couple of officers and a tracking dog. Oh, great, muttered Drake McBride under his breath. Another mutt. Excuse me? Nothing. Jimmy Lee Bayless quickly cut in. We'll cooperate totally, Agent Conaway. Whatever you need us to do, consider it done. Good. The officer took off his wire-rimmed glasses, wiped the condensation from his lens. Hardly any animal on Earth is more endangered than the Florida panther. Are you aware of that? There's somewhere between 60 and 100 left. That's it, and our job is to try and save them all from extinction. That's why we follow up on any possible sightings. But I told you there can't possibly be a sighting here because there ain't no panthers, Drake McBride protested. The officer said, they're really quite beautiful. Have you ever seen a picture? No, but I've seen cougars out west, shot dead and skinned where it's all proper and legal, basically the same varmint. Conaway put on his glasses and turned his back to the president of the Red Diamond Energy Corporation. Make sure you leave that gate unlocked, he said to Jimmy Lee Bayless. Yes, sir. Can I ask you who it was that called up and said they were the ones saw one of those cats around here? Conaway walked to his truck and looked to his clipboard. The name on the report is Hayduke, he said. George W. Hayduke. The name meant nothing to Jimmy Lee Bayless or his boss, who hadn't finished a book since junior high and college. We have a GPS waypoint, too, Conaway said, so we've got a good place to start. Really? Jimmy Lee Bayless suddenly felt queasy. Sulking, Drake McBride, so I guess any old crackpot can call up the U.S. government and say they saw a panther or a unicorn or a UFO, and you guys put a posse together the next day? Is that how that works? Special Agent Conaway got in his truck and rolled down the window. Be careful in this fog, he said, and he drove off. Detective Jason Marshall received 2 unexpected phone calls that Monday morning. The first one was from a man named Bernard Beanstoop III, otherwise known as Bernie the Bean, who was the most famous and most expensive criminal defense lawyer in Tampa. Bernie the Bean informed Jason Marshall that he had been hired by the grandmother of Dwayne Scrooge Jr. to represent the young man of the accused for arson. Bernie the Bean said he was currently working with the family to find Dwayne Jr. and persuade him to turn himself in. The attorney also stated that the boy was 1,000% innocent and he would fight all the charges pending against him. But he ran away from me, the detective pointed out. That's resisting arrest. Extenuating circumstances, chirped Bernie the Bean. The poor kid simply freaked out. Anyways, if you should find Dwayne before we do, please inform him that his grandmother already got him an attorney. And not just any attorney, the best. The conversation was not a bright spot for Jason Marshall, who had been nursing doubts about the Black Vine Swamp case ever since visiting the hardware store where the butane torches had been sold. No less troubling, the second phone call of the day came from an eager state prosecutor who told the detective not to fret about the videotapes showing the torches weren't purchased from Dwayne Scrooge Jr. The fugitive teenager remained the prime suspect, and the prosecutor asserted. The tapes don't prove the punk didn't set the fire. They just prove he didn't shop at the particular store. Heck, he could have bought the exact same brand of torch over the internet. Which was probably true, the detective thought, and still didn't seem like a suspicious coincidence given the timing of the arson. The only mystery in this case, the prosecutor went on, is how a rotten apple like Scrooge ever got into a private school like Truman. I mean, your daughter goes there, right, Jason? She does, the detective said tightly. Well, if it were my kid, they would seriously sketch me out. A guy with a rap sheet like Scrooge walking the same halls. I'll let you know the minute we find him, the detective said without much enthusiasm. Torkelson, the fire investigator, arrived at the sheriff's department at 10 o'clock sharp. Jason Marshall took him to his office and shared his misgivings about the case. Torkelson listened thoughtfully and then said, May I see the tapes? The detective queued up the VCR and sat down behind Torkelson, who watched each of the 2 videotape loops, pausing repeatedly to study the features of the man popping antacid tablets at the cash register while waiting to pay for the ultra-igniter butane torches. That's not the Screwed boy, Jason Marshall said. Obviously, the fire investigator hunched in front of the television screen, his knuckles propped beneath his chin. Well, what do you think? Jason Marshall asked. I think our prosecutor friend is going to be extremely disappointed. Torkelson punched the pause button on the VCR, clicked open his briefcase, and removed a clear plastic bag which held up for the detective to see. Inside the baggie was a cheap ballpoint pen stamped with the name Red Diamond Energy. Jason Marshall said, I remember that pen. You found it near the flashpoint of the arson. That's right, said Torkelson. The man who lost it is the same one who later called me to say that he found that boy's book bag at the scene. The detective tightened his necktie. Smiling, he said, How about that? The same book bag with the butane torch hidden in the pocket. Yeah, how about that? The fire investigator turned back to the TV where the torch buyer's face was frozen in black and white, grainy, yet easily identifiable. His name is Jimmy Lee Bayless, Torkelson said. He works for that oil company, Red Diamond. Jason Marshall managed to appear calm and professional, although he was very excited. So it went down like this. Bayless goes to the hardware store, buys a torch, number 1, starts the fire. Torkelson nodded. Probably got rid of it the same day. But later when he finds out that the you-know-what was arson, he gets worried. More like panic-stricken. So he rushes out to the same store and buys another identical torch to frame the screwed boy for the crime. That's how it adds up, doesn't it? The fire investigator returned the incriminating ballpoint pen to his briefcase. Jason Marshall stood up and checked the back of his belt to make sure he had the case containing his handcuffs. He said, There's still one big piece of the puzzle. Why did Bayless set the fire to the swamp in the first place? Torkelson popped the videotape out of the VCR. Let's go ask him. End of chapter.